Truth, logic, action, power. It's the GreggHoush show here on New Revolutionary Radio. This is a show where we seek not only to inform, but to inspire you to action. We're going to talk about politics and current events on our program, but we're going to do it from an angle of human rights, civil liberties, and activism. It's our goal to enable an informed citizenry, and we're going to do it by emphasizing critical thinking, news source verification, and actual science versus nonsensical quackery. But most important of all, we hope to inspire you, our listeners, to take action in your community. While it is our job to deliver the clear, verified truth, our talking to you is only a small part of our goals. The real power belongs to you, and it is up to you to decide where your strength lies when facing the real challenges ahead. But know that when you decide to stand up and make a difference, we will stand beside you.
And welcome to episode 2 of the GreggHoush show. With me, GreggHoush, my co-host Derek Gawry's here, and our friends David and Matt. And this is going to be a little bit different episode than the norm. Going to hand this one over to Derek to describe a little better and lead us into the full episode.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Greg. A lot of these episodes are going to focus on, in fact, most of them, activism, politics, current events, all the super juicy stuff that we like to hear about. Today's episode is a little different. It's fun. I think it's pretty interesting. It covers a lot of topics just from, childhood shenanigans for Greg up to today, and really why this show is launching and why we're starting it. So some of the things we're going to go over will go from Texas, where he grew up, all the way to the FBI, through Anonymous, Occupy, and beyond. So starting it off, first thing I wanted to go over with Greg is just really why the show, like why now, why the show, like what's going on. You've had a big following for a long ass time now. So why is now the time that it matters enough that you thought this needed to happen?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff that I know about, a lot of the stuff that I could talk to and, seem like I have half a clue, is really relevant and important these days. It is becoming more important as the months go on. Not only due to, of course, the Trump presidency, but the cybersecurity world, the hacking world, the activist world. I mean, all of it is becoming just front and center. We're at a point now where my mom, who luckily in the last year has learned how to use a smartphone, now is actually asking me questions about cybersecurity. Oh. And that is where the world has turned to. And one of the interesting issues about that world is a lot of the people talking about it in the media, and a lot of the people talking about it with their own shows, don't come from that world. They didn't grow up playing around with computers. They didn't grow up hacking. They didn't go through the actual motions. They're just learning about it afterward. Maybe some of them learned at college, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I just feel it's time for there to be a voice that actually came up through the fire and, really went through all of that also has, without actually attempting, learned a lot about media in the last few years. So here we go. We've got a show coming.
Absolutely. So a big part of it is about getting people on the same page.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think I've done with the last decade of my life is work hard at getting the news, the television news, the print news, everything from Wired magazine to CNN, to talk about hacking in a way that actually makes sense, to talk about activism in a way that is more positive. And, through any efforts I've done on going on their shows, on taking interviews, on being reported about, it's really been in hopes that I could get the points across to their audience in better ways and in more positive lights, usually in most of these hacking events in the last decade, I've kind of agreed with the hackers, and that voice wasn't really out there. And so getting it across, the other, important piece to that is figuring out how you get it across to the general public with language they understand, and learning to not talk over everyone's heads with highly technical words and language. And I think I've gotten pretty good at that part of it.
Sure. So I recently, I know this was government biometrics conference. There's TV shows like House of Cards that you've worked on. There's other ones as well. We'll get into that a little bit later. It's cool stuff, but I want to go back, I think, many years and just talk about GreggHoush as a kid. So people wonder, you're a character, you're a very unique person. You're the guy who kind of knows a lot about a lot and seems to somehow, just for some reason, be really interested in informing a lot of other people about it in this genuine way. So at least that's my take on it. And I know you pretty well at this point, I'd say. So where does that come from? What's the why behind it? So starting in childhood, what was the first start for you? What first shenanigans you get into? What's the first piece of life or crime you get into before hacking?
The hacking did come a little later for me, especially the computer use. I really wasn't using computers until my early teens. And a lot of other people who got into it as deep as I did, were playing on computers at home at age 5, I grew up in a family where by age 3 and 4, I wasn't too aware of the world around me like any 3 and 4-year-old, but I knew what was going on wasn't right. My father was robbing banks. He was selling stolen goods. He was running from the cops. It was interesting. I found myself sitting at the top of a staircase at about 1 a.m. because I'd heard a loud noise, and I was 4. And I looked down the stairs, which looks right at my front door of the house we were living in. And busting in the door was my dad and 2 other people. One of them was helping my dad carry the third person who had been shot and did not survive. And I was just 4, about a month past being 4, sitting at the top of those stairs. And it's one of those early memories where I only have a few pictures left in my head of it, but I talked to him about it later and, got more of a picture. And it's just, that's kind of the world I was born into. Now, he left early. He left when I was, again, 4, right before I turned 5. He was out of the picture and came around every now and then, but I knew he was out there just, up to no good. Whatever he happened to be doing, he would show up every couple of years with a story to tell with, I'm going to be around a little more often, but never really happened. So I lived with my mom, my sister. Hard times, high school dropouts, not really much in the way of work. My mom was working 3 or 4 jobs trying to just keep us fed because my sister was relatively sick. She had cerebral palsy and it was, expensive, and the money coming in from the government did not cover everything. So I learned very early on I needed to make money. And I hadn't really been taught by any parental figures anything about the law or about doing things right. So when I figured out that I was pretty decent with these computers at about age 13, I kind of headed down what now maybe be thought of as the wrong path, depending on who you are. Maybe the right path, for another group of people. But that's kind of the computer side of it. The real first kind of crime that I now know was really a crime started when I was 13, and This one I always just I find so funny for how naive I was in doing what I was doing. But I was big into arcades. I'm your typical nerd. Growing up, I'm into all the arcade games. Street Fighter 2 is just coming out. Everyone's starting to re-find arcades again. They're starting to blow up again. That really early 90s, explosion they had. And one of the arcades local to me had this game called Lotto Fun. And it just looked like you were looking at a lottery machine with a bunch of the little ping pong balls bouncing around. And you would have to guess which order they were going to fall out, of the tubes. And instead of giving you tickets, it gave you more tokens to play with. So it was really gambling. And the more you put in, the bigger your payouts could be. I mean, this was literally like slot machines. And so I figured out that there was a flaw in the game where I could get it perfect every time. There was actually a pixel that would change its color the second I was supposed to hit the button to open the door to let a ball fall out. And it was the craziest thing. This one little pixel down in the bottom right corner would turn yellow on a very blue background so you could see it. And every time it turned yellow, you hit the button and your ball came out. Even if your ball wasn't going to bounce right there, if you timed it, the next ball that you had chosen in order was the one that came out. It was the craziest thing. I mean, I'm positive at this point that someone programmed it to do that. But I could get to the point where I was making 16 tokens that were literal, I could go play other games tokens off of 4 nearly perfectly every time. At worst, I was making 12. So it was just pure profit. And I wasn't doing this because I was thinking about selling them or because I had any other thoughts in my head. I was just poor, so I could only go to the arcade with like $2. I was going to play for 15 minutes and have to ride my bike half an hour home again, you know? So I spent that night filling my pockets. I had $200 worth of tokens on me, and there I am 13, and I'm starting to think to myself, you know, I'm the kid showing up to school, you know, for an entire week of school in elementary and in the beginnings of middle school wearing the only 2 pairs of pants I have, so alternating daily because we just couldn't afford me to have much more in the way of clothing. Well, school pictures are coming up pretty soon, and I just tore a pair of my pants a couple days ago, which really sucked, and I have a whole lot of tokens. Aren't these things worth money? Huh. So I went over to one of the coin machines, and this arcade, by the way, was in a mall, so I could have just walked upstairs from the arcade, and there's, you know, all the stores to buy all the clothing you want. So I walk over to one of the coin machines, not knowing, you know, really in my head the value of what was in my pocket. And I just saw someone trying to get $1 worth of tokens, and I pulled out a handful of them. I mean, it must have been $25 worth of tokens, like just in my hands cupped in front of me, like I'm trying to get water out of a well or something with my hands, you know. And I handed them to him. I said, I'll sell you these for that $1. And the first thing he did was look at me funny and say, are those real? And so I just turned around to the machine that was closest, and I put one in, and it made the noise, and it showed a credit. And the first thought that hit my head was, I just wasted that. I don't want to play that game. Oh my God. Because again, that, you know, I don't have much money kind of, I'm thinking like, how poor am I that I just wasted it? Oh my God, my mom's going to be mad at me. I threw away a quarter, but the guy gives me the $1. And so it hit me right then and there. You know, I got to go back over there and fill my pockets back up and keep doing that. And over the span of about a week, I made almost $300. And, you know, here I am where that's more money than we saw as, you know, grocery money in 2 months normally at that time. Like I was lucky when I was getting 3 meals a day at that time of my life. And it was crazy to have that kind of money. But I instantly realized, you know, this is just free money. In my head, I was rationalizing, you know, I'm not really stealing from anyone. I'm not really, you know, I was trying to come up with ways, and it really ended with me finding kind of one of, I think, my only actual skill sets. Like, you hand me a hammer, I'm going to kill myself. I'm not good with much, but I learned that I was good at teaching other people how to do the bad things I was doing. And I brought in a friend, my friend Scott. And I taught him how to do it. And he was young and naive, just like me. So he went right along with it. And he was just as poor as me, if not poorer. Like, I mean, I saw him on days where he got to eat last night dinner, and he was happy about that because, you know, the last week he wasn't getting dinner. And so I made a deal with him. I'll teach you how to do this. And since maybe I figured out another one of these, you want to keep me like as your really good friend. So you're going to give me some amount of the money you're making. And after an hour-long argument, we agreed that I was getting 25%. I now know that's, you know, an interesting number, you know, when you look at that type of stuff. Usually you might actually find it lower, like down at 15%, but I was getting 25, and we brought in one more. By the end of like 2 months, we had 3 people just killing that place. And now I can look back at the economics of it and realize how much money we were actually extracting from a place that was working on small margins. And, you know, sorry to whoever owned that place, but right. That kind of led me down a path of I'm not doing much wrong. I realize now I was not only, you know, conspiring, possibly racketeering by the time we had 5 people in, based on, you know, how RICO works. But yeah, I was not doing good things. Luckily, statutes are long gone on that, and I think that company's out of business at this point. I really do hope I didn't do that.
Right.
But yeah, that's really where the beginning of just, you know, not caring about the law and doing whatever it took to survive kind of started for me.
Right. And you can see where this kind of goes to with the pattern, you know, starting with, you know, mother growing up working 2 jobs, doesn't have a lot of time to watch. Dad's really not around. Bank robber at that, which is sensationalized. And that's kind of crazy to think about, actually having a father that's a bank robber. $200 is a ton of money to you. That's a huge thrill. And it kind of builds up that pattern for you. The next thing you know, your network marketing, your social engineering. You're working with other people, teaching them the skill sets and replicating it and getting more value. So, you know, where does that go next? I mean, what's next in the story for you there? What comes up next? Because clearly this has a certain trend to it, a certain trajectory, right?
Well, yeah, there's definitely an end point to that long list of stuff I was doing. You know, that one turned to, I guess, what I'll refer to as real crime relatively quickly. We're probably, I mean, on this one I'm a little fuzzy, but it's 7 to 9 months, somewhere in there, into this. And I've been caught by one of the people who works there. And one of the guys who works there, who's basically walking around dealing with whiny kids because this machine stole my quarter, and he's just walking over, opening it up, and flipping the damn button to give him, another quarter. He's not making much money. That dude's probably making minimum wage if he's lucky. He takes me off to the side one day after he catches me selling the stuff, and he takes me to this corner of the building that I soon realize none of the security cameras or anything are on. And he just tells me, I've been watching. I think I have a good idea of how much money you're making, and you're going to give me some of it, and here's what I have to offer. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, but continue. I thought when he pulled me to the side, the cops were on the way. Like, I thought the jig was up, right? And no, he wanted half. He wanted to empty my pockets on the days he was there on my way out the door, count out half, make sure of it by literally emptying my pockets, and then give me half back and then let me walk out the door. And he wanted me to ID the other two people I was working with. And I said, do you really need me to ID them? If you've been watching, you know exactly who the other two guys are. He's like, I just wanted to see if you were loyal or not. And I'm like, what is going on here? Again, I was just about to turn 14. I really didn't have any clue like what I was getting away with. At that point, I really did, start to feel how wrong what I was doing was in terms of the law. But I didn't care. It's not how I grew up. I wasn't brought up to care about that. That was not a concern. And so we did it. And, it was free money. So what did I care if I was losing half of it? It was like, so instead of $60 today, I made 30. I would have made zero if I wasn't doing this, or I would have been at McDonald's, I mean, at 14, you could start to get some work down there at those types of places. So you were allowed to start work a little early in Texas when I was growing up. And I think in some other states you can now too. But yeah, so I didn't want to work at McDonald's. I was happy with what I was doing. And about a month and a half after that, this older kid looked like a high school student to me. I knew I recognized him from somewhere, but I didn't initially. Walks up to me and starts talking to me like I'm some crime boss or something. And I'm like, wait, back off. What are you talking about? A crew? I don't know what you're talking about. And he starts yelling at me about don't play dumb with me. And I finally recognized the guy, and he's the older brother of one of the kids who's actually helping us at one of the arcades with this game, because there were 3 arcades in town that had that game now. And there were, I think at that point, there were 7 of us working the game, and I was getting a little off of all of them. And so I just didn't know what I was doing. But he thought I was like some boss of like some crew of kids and, a kid myself. And so he has an actual breaking and entering that he thinks is worth a few $1,000s that he thinks he needs 4 or 5 people to help with. And boy, wouldn't it be great if they were all, 14 and 13-year-olds who weren't going to get in serious trouble by the law, maybe a small stint in juvie. He wanted to, have a bunch of underagers do the work for him because he had just turned 18. So he starts talking to me about how simple this will be and how he actually has a key to the building and knows which room the new computers are stored in that we're going to walk out the door with. And we can literally just throw them on our skateboards and push them to the door, because they're too heavy for us to lift. And I start thinking to myself, this is not that hard of a task. Yeah, and this is where I also learned a lot about the crime world, because later that evening, we met up with them, and I got 3 of the guys who were with me, and we went into that place, and we took those computers, and we got them out, and we got them to the curb, and a car drove up and took them away like we were told. And, then the next day, I was told we weren't getting any money for what we were offered money for, and that they don't know what I'm talking about. Again, that naivety of just not knowing what I was doing or who I was working with or what world I'd put myself into. I learned quickly not to work with people like that anymore, and to get a little more guarantee in place that, payment was going to happen. I also learned that I didn't want to do that type of stuff. That just seemed a little too far, a little too much. The tokens at an arcade didn't feel that real to me.
Okay, so I mean, what's the next step from there? You're 14 at that point. You've already got breaking and entering. You've got a lot of a lot of shenanigans, a lot of crap you're getting into, a lot of trouble. Now you're kind of having maybe a little bit of a moral quandary. You got a little bit of a moral problem. You're thinking maybe you want to take a step back. What's next in your life after that?
At that point, I wasn't doing well at school. I wasn't enjoying it. I made it through about another year and a half of school there. Really just not doing much. The lotto funds ended up getting taken out of all the local arcades. I'm not sure if that was just because, or, or if they knew or whatever, but I was never stopped going to any of them. So I'm guessing they didn't know that that kid right there was screwing us. They probably just figured out the game sucks and it's costing us money. But, we had lost our source of income. We had lost all that free money. And I almost, like, no better way to say it, spent about a year and a half just trying to be a kid. Like, I was just, riding my bike around, doing whatever. I had a pretty nice bike, a little nicer than I should have at our income bracket. And I learned to cover some of my tracks. I actually got a paper route to cover some of the money that I had that I then had to kind of pull out of where I had it hidden to start using to make it look, and I just made it look like I was getting a little more, like I was getting tips from people, things like that, I mean, people should have noticed that it was way more money than a paper route would have actually gotten you back then. My mom, being amazing at that point, actually didn't make me take my bike for the paper route either. She would drive me around, and I'd be sitting in the back of the truck bed with just piles of papers, throwing them into people's yards as we drove by at like 3 a.m. before then getting ready to go to school. My mom was awesome about that stuff. Yeah. But then, of course, right when we got the bike I could afford with the paper route, I then added pegs, I added a better seat, I added all kinds of extra stuff that anyone looking should have noticed. All that extra stuff isn't like $2. Like, he spent a lot of money on upgrading this little bicycle. No one noticed. No one seemed to care if they did. But I was still just trying to hang out with my friends, play some video games, not do anything special. And we get to about 16. I've already left home. I left home a couple years before that. I just couldn't take living at home anymore. I had enough money. And at 16, I find myself up in Kansas City. I did that on my own. I just left home and went to Kansas City. I was living in Dallas before that, of course. And because I knew my dad's family was up there and my dad was up there. And I knew he was in the area. We had talked a little. I showed up and just told him, "Hey, Dad, let's try this out. Let's be friends." And then talked to my mom about it, all that fun stuff. Because with everything that happened, she had full custody. He had no right for me to be living under his roof or anything else. But when I got there, we talked it out and everything. He agreed. Let's give this a try. We talked to my mom back home, who really had no right at that point to tell me no. But I had emancipated, But we're sitting there and. It's interesting. It goes a couple years of me and my dad just, again, trying to grow up. He thinks he's got to turn me into a man. He's that very overly masculine guy out there, doing crime where there's a gun in his, pants. Like, not like the crap I was doing, which was just stupid. But at that point, he had tried to calm down too. And he was working with my uncle at, my uncle's chain of furniture stores. He was trying to, be at least a little more legit, although on the side, I knew he was doing 100 things. I spent a couple years living with him before I ended up finding someone, moving in, getting married, really young. And I got a job offer in Chicago and left my father, kind of to his own devices out in Kansas City. And I moved to Chicago with my wife, our new baby. And we had, like a 4-month-old when we moved to Chicago, away from her family, away from everyone. It's kind of trying for her because, having a young baby, being really young herself, it was honestly really testing and hard for her because I had taken her away from the family. And I hadn't really thought about that when I got the job offer because it was a good offer. It was a programming job for good money in a new town that I thought would be a good, clean start for me. We did a lot of traveling back home. And during that time, my dad ended up showing back up in my life. We were maybe 3 years apart. And he starts sleeping on my sofa at my place in Chicago because he has nowhere else to go. Gets himself a job, doesn't really want to go back to the high life of crime because he's now kind of older. He's injured. He's got all these sores. He's kind of getting sick. It's just, you can tell he lived a hard life really fast with drugs and crime and running and getting shot and everything else. And just, you could tell the guy was winding down. I let him sleep on my sofa for a little while, we're doing fine. I'm working. My wife decides that she really needs to live at home, which to her is Kansas City. We end up breaking up. She ends up moving back to Kansas City. We try and maybe work it out. It's not working. We ended up in divorce. And I blame myself for that a lot, just for pulling her away from Kansas City with such a young child so early. It was not the right move. She needed the support. I needed the support. I didn't realize I needed it at the time either, but looking back, I know I did. So there I am, living now with my father again. We've each got a room in the place because her and the baby are gone. Only a few months go by, and I wake up one morning realizing that I need to pay a lot of bills. I've got most of my money in cash right now. Lots of circumstances led up to that. And I'm late for a meeting at work. So I talk to my father and I'm like, hey, I need to go to the office, but this needs to get paid. And he volunteers. He says, yeah, just give me the money. Tell me what needs to get paid. I think I know where to pay that one. And he's totally cogent. He's right there. He did know where to go pay all these bills. So I said, hey, I only work 2 miles away. I'm going to hop on my bicycle, go to work. You can take the car. Great. It's the day before rent's due, so he's going to pay that for me too. So this is really important. I'm not rich at that point. That was literally every penny I had on me to get those bills caught up. I come home that night, a little late because work was long, at about 7, and he's not there. I don't think much of it. But the next day, I wake up and he didn't come home either. So I start calling his phone, no answer. My car is not there. Call my landlord and say, hey, did you talk to my father yesterday? No. And you owe rent? Well, he has it. He was supposed to see you yesterday. A few days of this go by before I realize, for all I know, I'm never hearing from the guy again. And on one hand, should have expected it. On the other, it's my dad. But there he is, gone, out of my life with all my money, half of my possessions. And I'm sitting on the floor of my room, where my sofa and my car are gone. I don't even know why the sofa's gone. What did he do with that? But it's gone. And that's the last I ever saw of him. About a year and a half ago, I got a phone call from a hospital saying they needed me to ID someone who they thought might be my father. And because he was so good at the crime and everything else, he was off the grid. So they had been searching for weeks to find, hopefully, next of kin. And he was in a coma, but it was brain dead. It was literally just on the feeding tube, keeping him alive. The second they pull it, he's dead, and there's no coming back from it. They showed me all the results, and they just told me, look, the problem we have here is we can't pull the plug until you tell us to, but he's gone, and you need to live with that. And I'm like, I don't even know this guy anymore. I haven't heard from this guy since he stole my car and disappeared. So it took me a week to kind of come to grips with everything and let him go. And then, I did the work to find out who he was living with down there and got a hold of those people. And because the hospital weren't telling me, they had all kinds of strict rules about what they could talk about. But finally, those people were convinced by the hospital to leave their contact information to then give to me when I called in next. It just took a lot of work. And I was able to learn a little about what he'd gone through, but that was really harsh. I mean, that was my dad. That was him my whole life. But, here I am finding myself in Chicago, and, we'll take a step back to kind of tie in another piece of the story that doesn't involve him. And this, we're going to go back to Kansas when I first kind of got there and moved in with him. He wasn't the kind of guy who knew computers. He knew cars. He knew guns. He knew traveling really well. He knew staying off the grid. These were his skill sets. And so when I set up a computer at the house and started playing around with things and maybe logging into systems that I didn't have access to or wasn't supposed to, and maybe moving around some games and software and movies online that I wasn't supposed to, he had no idea what was going on. He literally did not know that I was doing any level of crime on the internet. He just thought I was waking up, playing on the computer for a little bit, meeting him up at the furniture store, doing some work, and I just, didn't have many friends or something, But, turns out what I was doing was helping to run some of the largest, whereas groups and piracy groups in the 90s. I was helping to operate Risk ISO. I was helping to operate a few other, major you would refer to as piracy rings. We were moving games, software, movies, music at the end there. Huge quantities of them too. I mean, it was thrilling. It was fun. It was kind of, sure, piracy had been going on because people were trading floppy disks in the 80s. But I mean, the reality of the high-speed internet, as it were, high speed, 14.4 and 28.8. Well, while all my friends were riding the 28.8s and hoping to upgrade to 56K when it came out, I was so deep in the crime that I had dual ISDNs at home and, was going about 5-6 times their speed and just moving all the bits around. But that was leading to a lot of headaches. That was me getting too deep. I was spending most of my time organizing how do we get applications out of companies that, of course, don't want us to have copies before they hit store shelves. So I was learning the social engineering tactics it took to turn someone in a company to our side. How do we get someone in Microsoft to give us a copy of Windows 95 beta build before it's even gone to the beta testers? Well, in the end, I actually had access to their build server where literally masters were made, beta builds were made, where the CD images, where the disk images were actually getting created. I had an FTP account on it. Like I wormed my way that deep in. And
was it for money or the challenge that you had to go that far with it? You had to get that software that early in development to get it out there to people?
For me, it was very much the challenge. It was, how deep could I get? How much could I get out of these companies? And what did they want for it? It turned in to getting that access to that account meant I had to turn someone at a hard drive company, and I did at Mac Store. I needed hard drives because my guy at Microsoft wanted hardware in exchange. Well, the guy at Mac Store wanted access to all the applications and games days before we even released them onto the internet. He wanted early, quick access. Well, I could give him that if I could get some hard drives. And we built a pipeline, of just, there was hardware coming from multiple hardware companies. There was software coming from multiple software companies. There were amazing young computer programmers who could crack this stuff and break the serials and the DRM and everything else. And these teams were just built and were pumping out all this software and stuff online. And I learned that there were ways to profit off of it, and did. I started making some money off of it on the side by helping people in China and Russia to box this stuff up and get it onto store shelves. And I had a little side game going with some money, but not a lot. It was enough, though. I mean, in comparison, anyways, to that world, they claimed in some of the lawsuits that I cost upwards of $8.5 billion in damage. And I mean, I definitely didn't make $8.5 billion, or I might still have some of it squirreled away. At this point, I'm lucky when I see $100 in the bank, but I was having my fun, and I knew at that time that the FBI were on our heels. They were hunting for everyone doing what we were doing, because in any time a corporation can claim to the government that we're losing money due to this, they're going to jump. They're going to go for it. And it was a good probably 6 years that we knew that they were hunting for specific people, that we just kept going and going and going and planting fake evidence, having them raid houses in other countries because we thought it was funny. Giving up IDs that weren't ours that they would then chase. It was years of that before someone actually narked me out. I know who did it, and I know he was caught first being an idiot. And there's a lot of people out there that think that I narked them out, that he narked them out too. The thing that those people who think I did it don't understand is, I was raided on the same day as all of you, like literally the same moment. They go in at the same time coordinated, so friends can't warn friends to delete their drives. Like, my raid happened literally the same time as all the idiots who thought I might have something to do with their raid. Like, it was surprising. But the guy who did it, I've never told the world, who I know ID'd me directly to the FBI, but his handle was Sparhawk, if anyone's listening out there from the old days. So have fun with that one, Sparhawk. There you go. Took a couple decades for me to say that one, but there it is. So yeah, it was definitely interesting times. I got outed, and in '99 I got raided. They came in, straight through the door, and typical fashion, the local cops first, making sure the scene is all clear, and the FBI agents, hiding in the background, just waiting for the locals, what I believe they referred to as cannon fodder, to go in first and secure the place. And then the agents came in, they sat me down on my sofa and said, "Be quiet," and started like cordoning off my apartment and my home into quadrants and taking pictures of everything, and then sitting down at computers and just starting to box everything up. It was surprising to watch. They cuffed me and had me sitting there, and I spoke up and said, "Can I just watch some TV? Literally, can you just like put on the news so I'm not sitting here bored watching you?" And yeah, that was a really interesting day of them taking me downtown afterward, after literally making me sit there and watch 8 hours of them tearing my house down. It was strange, man. I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Da, 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 da. I mean, I played dumb for a few minutes, but I mean, come on. I knew they were coming. I had warning before they showed up a few hours. So I was waiting for it. The strangest thing. Took them 7 years to prosecute me after that before I finally went to jail, because they had serious trouble understanding what was going on. Like, one, they were buying the industry's logic of, well, 500 copies of a $500 piece of software were downloaded, so he caused us 500 times $500 worth of damage. And I had to sit there with the AUSA and tell him, no, if lucky, 3 of those downloads would have been people who could have afforded to buy that $500 piece of software. And if their marketing was going gangbusters, well, they might have gotten 2 of those sales. There were not 500 lost sales of $500 here. And just years of back and forth of me not agreeing to any plea, of not wanting to help, of not wanting to go in front of a judge, of finally getting in front of one and then them getting everything wrong, before they finally, got a plea deal in front of me that I was like, yeah, I'll plea I did it, but, I'm not going away for years. It was just crazy. And I finally got sentenced, and actually went to prison in 2007. I was sentenced to 6 months and got out in 3 on good behavior, because what was I going to do in there? I mean, I didn't want to provoke anyone.
Right.
But one of the interesting things was I spent the first 27 days in basically solitary. I was in a small little room. I didn't have a pillow. I didn't have a blanket. I was on a little steel slab. Lights were out. It was torturous. It was not right.
I mean, solitary is usually for people that are scary, that have beat other people up, that have hurt other people, are a threat. But for you, what was that about? Why were you there?
I think I was getting mistreated simply because they had wanted me to go away for a lot longer. And when I got such a short sentence, they probably called in favors. I mean, in talking to my lawyer at the time, that's what he estimated had happened. So, I mean, I spent 27 solid days just sitting there, and it was torturous. It was not fun times, let me tell you. A couple weeks into no real good human contact and not much light, and sleeping on a steel slab, so not getting much sleep at all because I wasn't wearing, much in the way of clothing and had no blanket and no pillow. You begin to hallucinate. You begin to see things in the dark that, aren't there because you aren't able to regulate your sleep right. And so I started to feel very mistreated by the government at that point. I agreed that I deserved jail because I had literally done things that were crimes that I knew were crimes at the time. So I was accepting my possible punishment by doing the act, right? So sure, I deserved some jail time. I broke the law. I did it knowingly. And yeah, I did. There you go. But did I deserve the treatment I was getting? I didn't think that. And I hadn't been political before that. I hadn't done really anything that I cared about. I hadn't been an activist. I wasn't going to protests. I just wasn't that guy. The ASPA CA commercials come on the air and, they start trying to make you cry while showing you pictures of dogs. I was changing the channel. I just didn't care about anything except basically the crime I was doing. But that mistreatment and kind of what I went through there really messed with my head a lot. I came out thinking a lot different about the world, about what had happened, and paying a little more attention, and honestly, unable to go back to the crime, unable to go back to any of my old friends, any of the old things that I used to do for fun. bored. And that kind of leads me to 4chan.
So at this point, I mean, a lot of people would say nowadays, and right around the time this show is actually launching, is President Trump being in office, and a lot of people in a generation for the first time being really pissed off and actually taking action about things. I think there's a correlation there with at this time in your life being really pissed off for the first time and deciding now's the time to stop thinking or saying and time to actually start doing and getting active. So I think it.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I didn't have any causes I cared about in like particular. I was thinking a lot about prison reform, but only the stuff that had affected me while I was inside, not like some kind of grandiose, let's actually reform the prisons and we've got overpopulation problems. And none of that was in my head. I wasn't educated enough on the subject to be it. I was very ignorant of what prison reform really was. I was just thinking about it kind of sucked getting 6-month-old pudding as my dessert, that was 6 months old when they got it and a year out of date when I looked at it. I wanted that fixed. That's kind of low on the pole now of what I think might need to be fixed. But there I was, bored, nothing to do, couldn't go back to my friends, couldn't hang out with anyone I was doing, couldn't do any of my old hobbies because most of them involved, my old friends and my old habits. So I find 4chan. And here's a place where, there's not that many people yet, but it's been around for a few years and they're having a lot of fun. They're trolling. They're doing all kinds of crazy things. And sure, I knew about it before. I had even taken part in like one of the Habbo raids early on before I had gone away and stuff, but I didn't really know it. I'd only visited when someone had linked me to things, But after getting out, I really started taking part because it was entertaining me. It was something to waste my time with. I wasn't really hanging out with people. I wasn't doing, anything for fun other than stuff like that. And I got lost into that little world of, the memes that were starting to appear, because those were fresh and, Catterday, cat pictures with text on them, that all started there. Rickrolling started there. All these things were starting to happen out of 4chan. And I was there for a lot of those moments. And that was just a way to pass time, though. There was nothing activist or political about it. It was about the trolling. Yeah, going from there, it got really interesting.
So you got to get more organized at that point, you probably figure. You're kind of just having fun. You're escaping for a bit. You're getting away from problems in life. And then, you start to realize there's more people coming on here, getting more activity. It's going viral. More people are joining. So around this time is kind of around where Anonymous started to get started, isn't it? The initial formation of the people that started to do that.
Well, it's interesting because I kind of look at Anonymous as phases. There was an initial phase of Anonymous that had been around for a couple of years before that. But for the most part, they were more of a joke on the fact that simply the name of all of your posts on 4chan said you were anonymous. And the running joke was that, well, that must be one guy just having a conversation with himself. It was everyone just kind of making fun of it. And they would joke with all these, drawings and pictures of who Anonymous was. But it wasn't this ominous thing that it became. It wasn't this entity. At most, it was a few guys coming together to do a little troll or a little raid together. But, you'd see 8 people. And that's all it was. It was just that for years. And then they referred to themselves as the internet hate machine. The idea was that it didn't really matter what your feelings were. They were just there to have fun. And if having fun was at your expense, well, all the more fun. And I wasn't really there for, a lot of the more angry stuff they would do, but I thought some of the more hilarious stuff, like the Habbo stuff, like the Hal Turner stuff, was hilarious. But we get into January 2008. And this is when Project Chronology starts. And this is where I think kind of the more modern phase of Anonymous that everyone learned about, that the general public knows about today, really started. Because sure, there was something before that, but it wasn't this. And at this point, there was a lot of infighting from the people who had been around before this and the people who showed up for this. It was very much, there were two sides. And so I'm sitting there on January, I believe, 14th, 2008. And this video goes up on YouTube. And It's of Tom Cruise being hilarious. Just, I mean, it was internal to Scientology. It was supposed to be just for their people. It was rallying the troops, but he's saying just what I believe to be the craziest things. Like, this was hilarity. It gets taken down quickly. And we realized that Scientology took it down. Someone else decides to post, hey, you know, what's this video? This is funny. Everyone should do something about this. And I get on IRC, and there's about 8 people sitting in this channel, including me, that are talking about this video. And it goes back up. Someone else, you know, uploads the thing, we think, but it turns out it was the same person who had uploaded it the first time. Wasn't someone from 4chan, wasn't any of us. It was just, you know, and I didn't even know these other people, the 7 other people in the channel there with me. I met them literally as I joined the channel, right? Yeah. And so we took it upon ourselves to go hunt the person down based on usernames, everything else, messaging, whatever we could, to find the source to the video, because we knew it was going to get deleted again. It did, but we had a copy at that point. And we didn't want to download off of YouTube because at that point it was kind of, you know, you get really bad quality doing that. And we wanted to find a better quality copy. We did. So then that same person who had posted to 4chan earlier goes up and posts, everyone get in here, starts a channel on Party Van IRC named Xenu, after Scientology's wonderful Lord Almighty, the galactic overlord Xenu. And says we need to repost this video. And I'm there having this conversation as we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. Reposting the video is a great idea, and that's what we decided on. But one of the more interesting things about it being January 2008 is YouTube hadn't won yet. You know, they've really won that battle. Vimeo found a niche where they're still alive and they're doing good, but there was Veo, Vidler, and 50 other sites trying to be what YouTube became, you know? So there were a lot of places you could upload this video. And there were a lot of places you could just build email accounts, and they weren't really fighting that many bots at that point. So you could build 20, 30 accounts on Hotmail or on Yahoo at once from your home IP without even caring about clearing your cookies or anything. So we just started creating accounts and telling everyone, create as many accounts as you could on all the email providers, then create all the accounts on the video places and upload it. And over the next couple of days, we kept doing it because the videos kept getting taken down in like 5 minutes. This Tom Cruise video was just getting down. So we thought they have to be on the phone with like Scientology's lawyers and the lawyers at these specific places, or the ops guys or whoever at these specific places like YouTube, like Vidler, like Veo, had to just be on the phone, like not hanging up with each other, just saying next ID, next ID, next ID, like, and deleting this video, right? And it just got to be so funny because we knew if this was Scientology's lawyers doing this, which it probably was, then it was costing them a lot of money. Well, let's how far can we drain their bank account? And we're, you know, I think maybe by that point, almost a week in. We're 5 days into that or so. And a guy comes into the channel. And this channel's public. It's open. Anyone can join. We're not hiding. And he says into the channel, hey, the press are paying attention to what's going on here, and some stories are starting to come out. You guys probably want to make a press release since it's you guys doing it. And everyone on the channel's like, I don't know. What's a press release? How does that look? None of us have any clue what we're doing. But the 8 of us who were in there in the beginning move off to this side channel that was named Press. And in that channel, we start looking at PR Log, I believe, PR Web, just these sites where you can just read press releases. Like, that's something someone wants to do. But sure, we went up there and we learned the format. And one of the guys was a really good writer. A couple were really good at editing. And so we started building what would be the press release that we'd put out about what we were doing, and coming up with this real ominous tone and this language, and how were we going to voice this thing? You know, what was it going to look like to the world? And we really decided to hang on to that old mantle of internet hate machine. Like, how ominous, how scary could we make this brand we were building that day? And by that night, I think this is the night of the 19th, we're looking at what we've written, and it reads more like a video. It reads more like a script, not like a press release. So we decide we're gonna go that way with it. We're gonna make a video. We're not gonna. Here we are uploading to all these video sites. Why weren't we thinking about this before? Let's do this. And we start working on a different press release because we still want the short press release, but we want a video to go along with it. And About a day and a half later, we upload, after many arguments about what it contains, the Message to Scientology video on the Church of Scientology account on YouTube, where the of is 0F, not OF. That is my YouTube account. And we upload it up there and think not much of it, you know. So it's going to get a couple hundred views. There's going to be another 20, 30 people in IRC tomorrow. We're going to play around, right? I go to sleep. This is like 10:30 or so at night. I am still technically working a job at that point. I do need to get to work the next day. I get woken up at about 4 a.m. By my then girlfriend. And she's telling me that I need to get up. I need to get online. The IRC server's down. The video is currently airing on CNN. And I need to go check out the YouTube account and all these other things. And I'm just like, wait. I just woke up. Give me a sec. What? I'm not out of bed. I've got my phone up to me. I'm trying to close my eyes and go back to sleep. And then I'm finally starting to hear what she's saying. And I'm like, oh, shit. This was not on purpose. And, you know, it goes from there. Every bit of it is an accident, you know, and then we follow it up. Like we just thought we'd get a couple hundred people to have some fun for a week. And we thought they'd get bored. And, you know, in typical internet fashion, they've all got ADD. They're all living in their mother's basement, you know, all the stereotypes. And they're going to be gone in a week off on some other thing that they're finding fun. But instead, the next morning we wake up and we have to convince the people who were running that IRC server to let us stay. They've got to add some capacity. We end up on another IRC network for a few minutes just to try and, you know, figure out what's going on before we end up hours later back on Party Van, where they finally decided we can stay and they can handle the load. And by the end of that day, there's about 10,000 people sitting on the server, and most of them are trying to join one channel, this Xenu channel. And we learned quickly you can't have that many people talking to each other in one IRC channel, or it floods them offline, and you basically are DDoSing everyone else in the channel because there's 10,000 people trying to talk. So we muted the channel, and we put a bot in there telling everyone to shut the fuck up. Like, we didn't know what to do. We argued with ourselves for about 2 hours on what could we possibly pull off here that wouldn't, like, unmask people in their anonymity, but would still let us section them off in some way. And we thought to ourselves, you know, if you say you're in Boston, that doesn't de-anonymize you. There's millions of people in Boston. Who in Boston are you, right? Maybe we were a little wrong with this, but that's what we thought. And so we had the bot in that Xenu channel start telling people, look at the channel list and find a channel based on the nearest big city to you. I don't remember the exact language, but this is what it said. And join it. So join pound Dallas, join pound Paris, join pound London, you know. And if you're a little farther out, well, maybe your city's big enough to have its own. But, you know, if no one else is in there, just join the one that's bigger, you know. If you're in Albany, I think you might want to at least also be in the New York, you know, city one too. Just, you know, maybe you keep the Albany one. But, like, that's kind of how we were working it. And by the end of the day, there we were with a ton of cities and countries represented. And so, again, still not planning, not knowing what we were doing. The next thought hit us. Well, how many countries are here and how many cities? So one of the guys volunteered. He basically said, I don't feel like I've done enough to be sitting here with you guys. Let me go do some of the grunt work. Okay. So he ended up coming back to us with the fact that we were representing 142 countries, or 142 cities in 43 countries. And that's a lot of different people. Now, sure, there were 2 people in some of those channels, but some of those channels had hundreds of people. You know, the LA one had like 600 people sitting in it trying to organize. What are they organizing? Well, within a couple days, all on their own, this channel full of people who, you know, basically are from the internet, they start DDoSing, they start hacking, they start attacking, they start doing all kinds of memes online. They start uploading other funny videos. They start mimicking the video that we first released. And we think it's great, but, you know, what is this? What do we have? We still have no idea what has been built, who has been attracted to it. But right there, like, one of the big moments happens. Gawker Media comes up and puts the Tom Cruise video on their front page and says it's going to stay there. And in relatively strong language, I mean, if you read it, I'm paraphrasing, but they basically said the FBI is going to have to take these servers out of these racks before we actually take this video down, Scientology. We're sick of your lawyers. well, wait a minute. Okay, we went back to kind of our little channel there. And we're like, why is some giant corporation with jobs? I'm sure there's 401ks involved here if people care about that crap. Why are they risking this thing that we're doing? What have we done here? Are we just a bunch of kids trolling, or is something else happening? And so we again got into, what Anonymous normally does is heated argument with each other for hours before we decided that we should just go with it. Screw it. If that's what's happening, let's go down that path. What does that look like? What does that path look like? And after about 5 hours of playing around and yelling at each other, I came across a video, and it was of a woman standing here in Boston outside of the Boston Church of Scientology building. And she had a boombox, one of those early 80s, late 70s boomboxes, silver, dual tape deck, gigantic. Over her head, she was just holding it there with both arms and dancing, blasting music at the building, and saying all these things about them being a cult. And we're looking at it, and I pasted it into the channel, and I said, this is what the internet would look like if it went outside. Someone else literally, here's the language of the internet, right? But somebody else literally said, she looks like fucking retarded. And I said, yeah, that's what the internet looks like if it goes outside, just so you know. And, after a little back and forth, we decided, yeah, let's go protest. Let's do that. Let's turn this into a thing. Can we do that? Does anyone here know has anyone gone outside before, like with a sign? No? Okay. How do we do this? Mm-hmm. And we realized that with that first YouTube account, if we put another video up there, people would probably listen to it. Seems like a good idea. What do we do? I guess let's make a video. Let's use the same type of language. Let's use the same voice. Let's do it. At that point, it had like 12,000 subscribers alone, let alone all the viewers that were just checking it and not subscribing. And the video was up over 1 million views, the first one. And we're like a week and a half, 2 weeks in. This is it's moving at a pace that we have no control of. And so we made the call to arms video, which was telling people we're going to go outside. We're going to go to every building. I think all of you represented on our chat server. Yeah, every one of your countries and cities has a Scientology building in it. Let's do this. Let's protest. That was really naive of us. We put this out. Everyone loved it, it seemed. Sure, there were some naysayers, but for the most part, I guess because it came from that account, they just ran with it. We put out a lot of flyer ideas, other things, but within a day or two, it hit me that we had made some mistakes. It wasn't that far off in the future, and this was Scientology after all. Don't they go after their detractors? Boy, if you go in front of their buildings, you better cover your face. Oh, we need like an image. How are we going to do this? What are we going to wear on our faces? And so we argued again for hours because that's just how we solved all our problems. And we ended up deciding that a couple other people were going to go work on the next video we were putting out, whatever that looked like, while a few of us were going to fight with what we were going to cover our faces with. And we threw out a bunch of ideas. Everything from just putting a scarf over your face to a Batman mask to the Guy Fawkes mask because it was prevalent and it was in use somewhat on 4chan, but it wasn't, the de facto answer. It wasn't just the standard, So it hit us really hard that we hadn't left enough time if we choose a specific mask for it to be shipped to all of these, especially, more rural countries and cities where it's just going to take weeks for something to get there. So we're going to have to stay up tonight and call costume shops and comic book shops all over the world and find out what mask really exists everywhere. Start in Sydney. Why not just go first thing in the morning, 9 a.m. Sydney time. Adelaide, Perth, Melbourne, then to Tel Aviv, Hamburg, Berlin, Paris, London, New York, all the way across Chicago, Kansas City, Los Angeles. We called hundreds of shops all over the world. And by the end of it, we had no choice. The only mask that was in every single city we called in mass quantity was the Guy Fawkes mask. And for all we know, that becomes our standard anyways because of some of its use. But we did the work to make it the only practical choice. We literally knew we had no choice. So we started through some of the cities who were represented in our little small channel there, because some of the people who were trying to organize those cities and get them, you figure out what protesting looks like in New York City. How do you actually protest outside of a building in Times Square? There's that's got to be a complex thing to pull off, without getting just arrested. And so the people who were thinking about that stuff, we started feeding them imagery with the mask, with here's what we're going to do. Everyone should get them, and it worked. Everyone bought it. Everyone was like, yes, that's our image. That's what we're doing. So the mask sold well, but we actually had no choice but to choose that mask. Like, no matter what other people were going to try and show up to these protests with, I mean, if we were going to go with one image, that was the only one that existed for cheap in every city. And there we are with that out there now. So now we've told the world, go protest, all these locations. Here's some possible flyer ideas. We had a few people do some research to gather up some talking points. What are they doing bad that we're mad about? What can we actually say that's honest about them? Let's talk about fair game. Let's talk about disconnection. All these things that we're now learning, we didn't know and we didn't care about them. We just thought Tom Cruise was funny last week. Now we've got to know some facts. So it looks like we actually are meant to be outside of their buildings. Sure, half the people were out there with signs that said "Long cat is long," and I'm 12 and what is this? I mean, but the other half were holding up signs like why did you kill Lisa McPherson? And other signs like that. And because we had educated ourselves a little, but we're still a solid week away from the protest. Someone shows up on IRC screaming in one of the main channels. I think we had opened Xenu up by then and he was in there cursing, yelling that we're all, in his words, fucking idiots who need to fucking go home and fucking stay in our parents' basements. And someone in there decides, hey, what are you doing? I need to talk to you. I need you to shut up. You're just. So he starts talking to the person in private. Learns that this guy's claiming to be from Greenpeace. And he's claiming to have a lot of knowledge of really contentious protest styles and targets who don't want to be protested, and that we're doing it all wrong, and that this is going to lead to serious problems next week. Well, that person believed him. And so handed him off to me, just reached out and said, hey, I know you control that account. Maybe you guys can put out another video with this guy's concerns. I don't know. I start talking to the guy. I don't know that I believe him at first, but he sounds very knowledgeable. The first thing he says to me was, you realize none of these people that you're sending outside against an adversary like this have any training dealing with an adversary who does have training at provoking you.
Yeah.
Scientologists at these types of protests will try and get you to punch them. They want you to throw a brick at their building so they can get the cops to come get you. And they're pretty good at provoking. They're pretty good at agitating. And none of the protesters that we were going to be sending had ever been up against that. Hell, half of these kids probably are the type of kids who walk around with a pocket knife in their pocket. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to go up against a group of people who like to agitate, maybe don't show up with a knife in your pocket, just for the look of the thing. He starts talking about the fact that he believes some of our kind probably are dumb enough they're going to throw a brick through a window. Like, what's wrong with you people? And I'm sitting there just taking the brunt of this attack because now he's in personal message with me and he's just cursing the whole time and yelling and screaming. Finally, after like an hour of listening to him, he's calmed down enough that he's like, okay, so what do you think? I'm like, well, I think a lot of that sounds right, but this is anonymous and these people aren't going, I can't tell them not to bring their pocket knife with them. I can't tell them not to do something. They're not just going to take orders. And so I brought him into the channel where we had worked on the other couple of videos and a couple of the press releases and whatnot. And at that point, it was named Marble Cake. We'd come up with a new name for the channel and made it private. Because we were trying to just work, as a little dedicated team on stuff. And we were kind of sick of getting trolled a whole lot by other Anons. So he explains it to us and we realize the thing that we need to do is come up with not rules you had to follow, but some suggestions. And with his help that day, we came up with 22 of them that we called the Code of Conduct. And we made the next video, the third video to go out on the Church of Scientology account, the Code of Conduct. And it listed off just do these things, but also it listed off cover your face. It listed off, all the basics that you really needed to know to be safer at this type of a protest. Whether that was needed or not, we'll never know. We put it out there and only a couple, arrests happened during that entire day at other protests. Like it was relatively good for us. But then we're looking at it. Let's fast forward to the night before our first protest. It's only 5 more days in the future after that, right? We're sitting there. And everything's been going at such a pace that we don't have time to think. We don't have time to plan for the future. We're literally just what's happening today, right? And at that point, we realize that only about 2 hours from now is actually 9 a.m. in Sydney. We told everyone to go at 9 a.m. Well, that means in Sydney, in 2 hours, while we're still awake at 9 p.m., my time in Boston, they're going to be live. I wonder if anyone's going to be taking pictures. You know, today there'd be 500 people on, Snapchat and Instagram and everything else on this, right? But then those didn't exist. And this is not that long ago. It's only 2008. But, people were still out there with like digital cameras that they were then taking SD cards out and stuffing them in their computer to get the stuff up, right? And so we started reaching out, and we started an IRC channel named Reporting. Like, start reporting back all night as these cities happen. Anyone, we were hoping, we were just begging the world, could 50 people please show up in one of these cities? Could we actually, because we didn't think any of these people were going to come out of their houses and actually go protest. I mean, again, these were people from 4chan, we thought, right? Who's going outside? That's not what those people do. Again, the stereotypes, right? By the time Sydney was done, just over 250 people were there, and that was City 1. We were looking at this, if we had 1,000 people worldwide, that was going to be amazing. Our first city of what turned out to be over 100 was 250 people. And then Perth had like 100 people. Adelaide had 200 people. Melbourne had 200 people. We leave Australia, we've already broken 1,000, and I'm going to sleep. I can't stay up any longer. I need to be up early in the morning to make it to our protest, And it was wild. By the end of it, we believe somewhere, and not to say it, but just to say it, somewhere over 9,000 people actually came out to protest worldwide, 142 cities. And I still have to this day an archive of images from every single one of those cities, including Tokyo, where famed Japan Anon went alone and did it all by himself and had some strangers take pictures of him with his camera and then give it back to him. He did not stay long, feeling a bit exposed alone outside of their building. But that I love looking through those images. That was a very interesting few weeks.
Absolutely. I mean, so that all started out as a joke, right? I mean, the first video.
Every step of that was a troll followed up by an accident, and then somehow we responded in a way that seemed to build what we know now as anonymous. But man, if we had set out like the weeks before that and planned out, okay, we're going to release this video and then we're going to do this, then in a month we would have never pulled off what we pulled off. There was no level of intelligence on our side that was going to do that. If it wasn't an accident, it wouldn't have happened.
Do you think something to that? I mean, something that starts out as a joke, something that starts out as a troll, and something that turns into something that's a lot bigger than that? Do you think there's something to that? I mean, something that starts out as a joke, something that starts out as a troll, and then turns into something a lot bigger than that, a movement with thousands of people?
I think it being organic really helped more people join in. The fact that everyone was able to do whatever they wanted really helped it build because people took more ownership. I think if there was an actual top-down structure to it in the beginning, it wouldn't have worked. People wouldn't have wanted to take orders. The fact that they were just listening to that YouTube because it happened to be putting out ideas they liked, I think was important. And the fact that we, while sounding very serious, we're using a lot of kind of internal language that, that type of person would see as a joke, but the general public wouldn't, really, really helped.
Humor and satire helps people to digest those things sometimes too. So at this point, you're totally unexpected in a situation where you have connections with media, you have people contacting you, you've got thousands of people following you guys in a chat network online that you didn't have just a few months before. What's next? I mean, what are you going to do with that kind of following?
We decided that what we would do is try and keep them going. One of the things that the guy from Greenpeace told us, or maybe not from Greenpeace, we still don't know if he was, but I mean, he sure sounded like it.
Seemed like it.
But he told us was, if you're going to throw any more protests after this, you have to tell the people during the first protest that there's a second protest. And his logic was, if they leave your protest thinking that was all this was about, they're going to go home And they're just going to be, okay, that was fun. This was awesome. I'm really happy I did that. Instead, you want them going home, sitting in the cars, on the trains, the buses, walking, whatever, thinking about what they're going to do next month. Are they going to dress up a little different? Are they going to make a different sign? You want them already planning for that next event, leaving this one, or you've lost them. It's a different mindset they leave the protest with. So we went and spent the last couple days right before the first protest planning out what the next month looked like. And just so happened, that the first protest happened in February. The second one was March. And in March was L. Ron Hubbard's birthday, the founder of Scientology. And so we planned a birthday party for good old L. Ron Hubbard on, I believe it was March 15th. And we titled that protest Party Hard. And a lot of Andrew WK was played at said protests around the world. Mm. If it was streaming, he would have gotten a lot of pennies, I think, at the way that calculates. But yeah, and then it just turned into what we did. Might as well just keep going. Let's go month after month after month. And we would theme them. We had a piracy themed one. We just would theme them and be unbelievably stupid about it because the humor seemed to keep people around. And it took a while before it turned into anything other than just playing around with Scientology.
It was a lot of fun, obviously, that you guys had. There was also a lot of growing up in there, I think, too. So some of the causes seemed to change along the way. So what did some of those look like?
Well, throughout 2008, some of the older school Anon stuff happened. Some more hacking stuff happened, like the Sarah Palin email hack. That was someone who self-identified with Anonymous and, came out of 4chan and posted about it on 4chan. And, there was the all hip hop and the SOHH attacks that Anonymous did, DDoSing those websites and posting all kinds of fun comments on them. But that was more of the old school stuff, although there were a lot more people involved in it because so many more people identified as Anonymous after what we had done. But really, the next big thing that I think that started to open our eyes to kind of the politicization and the power that we had with Anonymous, with the brand, with the name, was, I want to say it was June in 2009. It was a good solid year and a half later that the bigger things started to happen. And that was when Iran started to protest after the presidential elections that a lot of people thought were false. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad won again, and it was called the Green Wave movement. And what we did as the administrators of a then anonymous kind of website called Why We Protest, which is still up today. We started iran.whyweprotest.net and set up forums. And we got some native speakers to help us moderate, to help us run the thing, to organize it. And we got a bunch of people on the ground actually there in Iran to start, taking part in these forums and getting the news out. And we set up another site for them where the locals could get news out anonymously so it wasn't their name attached to what was coming out because they were scared. People were getting black bagged. People, everyone will remember the woman who was shot in the streets during the protests. So it was weird because we hadn't really been super political in that way before, but this wasn't Anonymous in the streets being political. This was just another group of people. This was mostly, late teens to late 20s kind of, and some early 30s, but, the bulk of it was a really youth-run group of people in Iran protesting their government for the first time in a while, having the balls to just go outside and, do that. And of course, it got crushed in that government. They definitely came down on it hard. But it definitely led us to think about, what Anonymous was doing. We didn't really go much farther with that, though. We just kind of went back to some of the hacking, some of the trolling, some of the other stuff like that. And get to the end of 2009, the beginning of 2010, and some rumblings in Australia start happening where they're trying to get, again, this is like the fourth time they've tried to pass it, but they're trying to pass laws that allow them to filter the internet. They want to be able to block websites. They want to put up something like China's Great Firewall. They want to set up a blacklisting system similar to Saudi Arabia's. And a lot of the people there didn't want that. And some of them had, started self-identifying with Anonymous and started, taking part in some of the earlier ops. One of them, a guy named Tux, showed up on IRC and started talking about wanting to do an op related to that. Most of us hadn't heard of it. We didn't know what was going on. But a few Anons had, and a few of them knew me, knew the Church of Scientology account, knew a few of the other organizers of some of the bigger protests we had done, and decided to point him in our direction and just say, hey, you guys, talk to him, see what he's got going on. For me, I didn't know why I was being contacted. I'm just some other guy here. Yeah. I'm not anything. But it got really weird that night for me because he started explaining that they're using a very specific scare tactic in the media to convince the public to let them put this firewall in place across the entire internet. So everything coming in and out of Australia would block these sites. And their scare tactic was women with small breasts cannot be allowed to be seen naked on the internet. Because if men see women with small breasts, over time, that will turn them into pedophiles and they will like children. And then all of our children are going to get molested. We know that's not the case. We know that that's just not true. I mean, come on, seriously, that's bogus. It's a scare tactic, though. They're convincing the older crowd, the voters, really, that this is okay. So when they pass it, they're not voted out of office, right? And he's explaining it to me, and I'm like, why are you talking to me? Who am I? I'm A, not Australian, B, like just some guy. But he's like, well, didn't you have something to do with like one of the videos? I think I need a video. And we need to talk to the press. I'm like, oh, well, one of the guys who helped me write a press release a few months ago is online. Want me to get him in a channel? You guys can talk? So I set up a channel and I bring them both in. And then, well, yeah, the guy who did the video work on this video for us is around. Let me bring him in. And by the time, we're 2 hours in, I've got a channel of 20 people who all like trust me enough to do some work on this project and are talking to him now and feel the project. Because in the end, this is a country trying to take pornography away from the internet. And this is a bunch of kids from 4chan. I don't think they were going to put up with that.
Right.
So they started an op called Operation Titstorm. They were, one, taking down as many government and politicians' websites as they could, DDoSes, any hacks possible. But they were also going to anything in Australia that would allow user-generated content, a forum where you could make a post, any kind of social type of sites, and posting tons and tons of nude pictures of women with small tits, just as much as they could, just to kind of prove a point, right? And that's, of course, why it was named Titstorm. I went to sleep after just like bringing all these people together, not thinking anything of it. And again, just, I know a guy who can write, kind of. I know a guy who can make a video, I guess. What are we doing here? I'm going to sleep. So I went to sleep after the channel was there. I get woken up again. Another one of those, just like the first video. I get woken up really early in the morning, like 6 a.m. And it's an aide to a senator in Australia saying that because Scientology had doxed me and my, phone number was online, they had found me. And the senator wanted to talk. And so he gets me on the phone with the senator. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't there someone who gets paid to do this? Like someone went to school for some political, degree that should be on this phone call that isn't me. Right. But sure, what do you want? And he starts saying, please make it stop. I'm still in bed. I haven't woken up to see what these Operation Titstorm guys have actually done yet. I don't know. So I say, can I at least, get over to my computer here? Like what are you talking about? I get up, I'm getting dressed here. Like I'm buck naked talking to a senator in another country. Like I'm just still wondering what the hell is going on with my life. And I get some clothes on, get over to the computer and start looking at what's going on. And There's people protesting in some of the major cities with signs already. There's government websites offline. There's a flood of content. There's the news covering it now, because I'd remembered a few news agencies that had asked for, stuff, and I had sent them over stuff before, and I'd given them the email addresses that I'd talked to, not thinking that like that was a big deal. But now, the ABC Net Australia had already printed it and gone live with it, and turns out like they were really causing some trouble. And so I said, I can't stop anything. And looking at what they've done, sure, like things have started, but this is just the start. Like, this is like the shot over the bow, man. Like, this is going to get way worse. And he responded, literally, exact words, "Is that a threat?" I said, "No, I didn't say I was going to do anything. I'm just telling you the future, man. This stuff is not going to go better. It's only going to get worse." And, for the crowd listening, one of the things you got to remember is at that time, none of the hackers or the people who actually really had those talents have been arrested yet for working within the anonymous stuff. The Sarah Palin hack, sure, a guy had finally been caught, but, most of the people who really identified in this community and actually still had those talents weren't sitting in a jail cell or hadn't been prosecuted and now sitting at home not wanting to do that anymore. So there was still a relatively large talent pool of, people willing to do some bad stuff. And so I knew that was coming. I knew their email spools were probably going to get dumped. And so I just started telling him like what you can expect in the next few days. And he calmed down and finally realized that the right question was, well, what can we do? And it was a simple response. Come out publicly against this vote that's happening next week. Don't vote for it, man. Get rid of the filter. Just drop the whole thing. And he said, 80% positive in our parliament here. We're gonna pass it. And I said, okay, well then this is gonna continue and it's only gonna get worse for everyone who votes yes. And he says, let me talk to people and get back to you. I get off the phone. I'm still wondering, why did I just have that conversation with this person? Who am I? For one, I wish I was still anonymous, but Scientology had outed me and my name was everywhere at that point. I had no control over who knew who I was. And the press were loving printing it. So later on in that day, which is now late night their time, I get called back by this guy. And he's like, what if, we put out some statements that were basically saying we were going to rethink it? Not that we weren't going to vote for it, but that it's kind of more moderation. We were going to slow it down a little. And I said, well, maybe the people on this side will slow down. And the conversations went like that for a couple days. And slowly, the Operation Titstorm people did slow down a little. And those people started talking a little more about how maybe we're not going to. And, come vote time, they didn't vote for it. And I got to say, it was weird because I do think that was the first time that Anonymous really did something political from the start for, somewhat political reasons and won. And this was against a nation state. This was against Australia. So, and it happened so fast that, again, we had no time to think about what we were doing. Like every 5 minutes I was like, why am I on this phone call again? But that's a different thought than really what are we doing here, grand picture. Big picture here is this thing that's appearing on the worldwide stage and we have a hand in it. It was just crazy. So we spent the next few days after that vote just having conversations about what are we going to do with this? Do we want to actually go after more big political causes? Do we want to really do anything else? And yeah, it was crazy. Over those next few months, you had things like Operation Payback startup. You had Avenge Assange startup. You had Bradical. These were all ops that Anonymous was taking part in. And it just grew from there. It got really political. It got really onto the world stage. You were reading news articles about Anonymous daily. You were seeing them covered on live news weekly. You were seeing documentaries starting to be filmed. Like early goers were starting to get some early footage about what they might turn into a documentary in a year or two. That's really where it got politicized. That's really where it started to feel like this was a tool that people could use for political cause. That was strange, let me tell you, because we had no idea what was being built while we were doing all that early stuff.
Absolutely. What do you think the exact cause was that it became such a big deal after and got so publicized and got so much media? after that event? Was it that event? Was it Australia, Operation Titstorm, or was it a combination, or was it the way that things went about happening?
I got to say, I think where we really blew up on the world scene, where you look back at a lot of the books that are written now, they might tell a little of the early history, but they really go into great detail looking at, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Assange, the ops related to those four things, which really were 2010 into 2011, right around there, very specifically because anonymous and outlying groups started attacking PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, to a lesser extent even Amazon got hit a little but never went down, and that with that financial kind of hit, people were thinking, well, they're going after big multi-billion-dollar corporations who are getting angry. These people have the ear of all the governments and all the prosecutors and everyone at the FBI and CIA and Interpol, and they're going to start looking for you. They're going to come a lot harder, and that's really where it happened. I think that's where you see the people like the ones that became Lol Security and the ones that became really well known, like the Sabuj, the Jeremy Hammonds, and all those starting to appear. And a lot of the storytelling even starts there, and you hear a lot of people who even self-identify as anonymous today kind of thinking of that as really its launch-off point. When as we just talked about for an hour, I really put that around 2008 when we really kind of came up with the Guy Fawkes mask and the ominous tone and the way we voiced it and the style of press release and just everything else we did and our first protest, Yeah.
So, I mean, is it around then that, things start to get a little bit more serious for some of the hackers? You mentioned earlier when they were running Operation Titstorm in Australia that a lot of the hackers were kids. They were immature. They were just having fun. They were just putting on a shit show for the world to watch, basically. They didn't really know consequences that well. Is it around that time that, they're starting to attack some financial institutions that some government repercussions happen?
Yeah, I mean, going into that, you start seeing after PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, you start seeing people getting caught for the DDoSes, for all of that. You start seeing people actually going to jail and getting prosecuted for taking part in these anonymous events, and that definitely stifles some people. You see a lot less people taking part in the actual denial of service attacks at that point because they start feeling it. And I think it really did dull a little of that edge at that point, but it didn't slow anything down. I mean, that just, it changed a little of the tactics.
So what comes next for, you, I guess, at this point, to get specific, if you're going to get away from an area where there's a lot more risk, there's a lot more risk involved, maybe you want to make decisions to still make change. Is that kind of where your thinking was in moving into things like Occupy and into the next steps in the future?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have kids, I have a family. I really can't be in those places where the major hacks are taking part, especially when they're being discussed and organized. So I find myself in some of those places during this time period. And luckily, I've gotten pretty good at knowing where the line is. When someone starts talking about I'm going to, I walk out. I leave the channel. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm really having trouble maintaining that at that time, though, trying to avoid, one, knowledge that I don't want to have now that my name's out there, because, if the FBI come calling, I don't want to have the answer for them. I don't want to be in any way compromisable. If I don't know, I don't know, right? And so
deniability.
Exactly. As much as I can forget as fast as I can forget it, So what one of my favorite things was, let's look at someone who did get outed, who did get, run through the legal system, Kayla. For the longest time, Kayla was a 16-year-old girl. For 5 years, Kayla was a 16-year-old girl. But you know what I did? I believed it. And I believed it on purpose. And I just ran with it. And I let that stay in my head because you know what? It was better that way. I did not want to know who this person was or what country they lived in. That way I could never answer those questions. And I did a really good job of that. I did have to yell at people sometimes for using colloquialisms. If you say a very specific word that really is only used in kind of this general area, like in this one city in England for a short period before it then became kind of nationwide for a little bit. Everyone was calling, people they didn't like chavs, or, that meant something, right? Well, if you called me one and, you used it properly, you probably were from around that area. And so, that would give me too much information. I don't want you doing that. And so we actually did, in a lot of the more private channels, have those discussions like, don't use local terminology that isn't just unbelievably generic. Don't tell me that you're going to a specific event like, say, Carnival, because I will know you're in Brazil. I don't want to know you're in Brazil, damn it. It's just that type of stuff. And that's when we started hearing words. I'm focused on, just what can I get done without getting myself in trouble and without learning things about people that I shouldn't know. That's when we start hearing from some Tunisians. That's when these people show up and they start saying, we need to go to the streets in our country. We need to get rid of Ben Ali. We think we can do this. We need your help. And of course, the first thing I say when I hear about this is, what? You want to use some anonymous tactics to help you get a protest started that's supposedly going to overthrow a nation? Yeah, sure, buddy. That's who we are. Yeah, we're not just a bunch of basement dwellers. Nope.
They've got no one else to ask.
It seems to be that what turned out was these were people who did self-identify as anonymous, and they had what has been lovingly referred to as the keys to the kingdom. They had passwords into internal government systems. They had logins and ways around firewalls to get in places that would let you take down systems. And what was really interesting about that is a lot of other Anons just decided, yeah, let's play with this. And they started Operation Tunisia. And the conversation got really interesting because it was local run. It was Tunisians actually feeding information into the collective. And it was people from the collective trying to figure out, what do you do? How do you protest at this level? What happens? And one of the things we learned was they're going to cut off phones. They're going to try and cut off the internet. They're going to do all of these things to try and keep people from getting the word out, from letting the world know what atrocities might be happening, right? So what if part of the battle is keeping the lights on? Can we keep communication happening? Can we keep the cities talking to each other? And there were a lot of other subgroups and groups just not even really affiliated with Anonymous, like groups like Telecomics and their Blue group, who were working on that angle and what could we do. But we were working in unison and we were definitely talking to each other. And there were people in our channels and people in their channels that were keeping in communication. And as the ideas for, the first step is they'll probably just try and block Facebook and Twitter and things like that, so the social news isn't coming out. So people just sitting on the street aren't posting to their Twitter that cops just attacked another protester or something. Well, how smart are they? What technology do they have? It's actually pretty easy from the people that we knew and what access they had to these government systems to find out what they were using to do that. So simple proxies were going to defeat that. Okay, well, let's get some proxy provider in Europe who's willing to give us some free proxies to use. Great, but they're going to figure that out and block those proxies. Okay, well, when they do that, what do we need? Well, we need some VPNs. Well, let's get a VPN provider that we throw up right afterward. Okay, what happens when that falls? And by the end, we had 7 layers of that figured out, including all the way down to some satellite modems that were provided by a European ISP. And we were thinking all this through because looking at older protests and things before even the technology was this clear, you would see these despots, these dictators surround cities and then inform that city that the rest of the country's already fallen. You are the only city left. And when they couldn't communicate with anyone else, they would believe this. They would buy that. They would starve them into the point where they were delirious and believing it because food wasn't happening and everything else. So if you could cut off that as even a tactic they could use, and they learned quickly that wasn't going to work for them, that would A, be really good for the people in those cities, but B, also ensure that, all the cities knew just how good it was going in that city. And these were important pieces. But as we were working all that out, before anyone went to the streets, We all know what happened. Someone set themselves on fire in Tunisia, and when that kid did it, everyone decided it was time to go to the streets tomorrow. It was not 2 weeks from now. It was not what everyone was talking about. It was not any of the plans that had been made. It was, we're outside tomorrow. This is done. We're done here. And so a lot of Anons started hacking into the systems, started dumping internal documents, started helping the protesters organize and run systems to keep themselves communicating, even to the point where some Anons local were starting to work on ways to get the video and audio and images out. One Reuters reporter was literally using an anonymous feed to get his pictures and video out so Reuters could print. And it just, as much support as Anonymous felt it could offer was offered. And there were some Anons, very close to home, some Anons that were over there and taking part on the ground during the protests. And it was surreal watching it happen. And then Ben Ali flees during all of this. He goes to Saudi Arabia. And about that same time, Egypt is looking like it's about to erupt. And this is when everyone starts to realize that this isn't just Tunisia. This is something bigger. This is most of Northern Africa about to flip here. And some of the Middle East might be moving too. And the actual next channel, surprisingly, that got started was Op Syria. That didn't really go anywhere for a while, and we all kind of know how that ended. It didn't. It's still going. But we ended up being asked to help out in Egypt by some locals there who were working on some stuff. And as we were starting to work out what services we could provide, again, could we keep you on the internet? Could we keep them from cutting the internet in the first place? Could we keep your information flowing? Could we keep the cities talking? How could we help you ensure more people show up to Tahrir Square? As we were thinking through all of that and working it out, a Google employee named Wael Ghonim put up a Facebook page. And some people signed up to it, but we were talking to some anthropologists, we were talking to some psychologists, and one of the things that they taught us was, in those environments, everyone's so scared that if I go outside, that if the government knows that I was one of the protesters, they're just going to show up tomorrow and kill my family. Like, I'm not even going to get arrested. We're just going to all be dead. And with that fear, that Facebook page wasn't growing that fast. There weren't many actual Egyptians saying I was going for those first couple hours. So we decided to cheat. And using some of our programming capabilities, we built bots. And we started filling up that page with people saying they were going to the square and they were joining in the protests. And we made fake profiles that just looked like they were Egyptians living in all those surrounding cities and in those areas. And as we started adding more to it, more real Egyptians started actually adding themselves to it. And then we were able to back out some of the bots and bring them off. And, by the end, I don't think we had any of our bots left actually running unless Facebook hadn't deleted them, because we had kind of, made it clear by the end that they were bots by screwing around with them a little. But it was pretty much all Egyptians on there. And everyone saw that when 1 million people show up, right? 1 million of them go out to the streets. But what could we do to help? And then Libya starts to go, and what can we do to help them? Well, again, it was, could we keep the internet up? Could we cut the sources of internet and information for the despots, for the dictators? What could we do? And that one went sideways so quick that we didn't get to offer too much help. I mean, that one there didn't look to be a way for that one to come together without violence. And I, for one, wanted nothing to do with the violence. That was not what I was signed up for.
There'd been a lot of that to that point, obviously, and it wasn't something that was involved in many of the adventures you've been in on before. So at this time, it's obviously a lot of growing up. It's a lot of hard times that have happened, a lot of death, a lot of a lot of bloodshed too, which is definitely not something you initially were looking to sign up for. It doesn't seem like. The initial goal was really just, it was helping, and it was often making yourselves laugh while you were helping, right?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about especially like Op Tunisia, when the media started covering, what was going on there, some of that was because of what was happening online. You know, when they didn't cover it at the very beginning, it was kind of bothering us all, and we all started, you know, pounding every news contact out there with, you know, information until they did. But one of the first questions I got asked was, why? You're just some American living in Boston. Why are you doing this for these Tunisians? And that was a really odd question for me, because inherent in that question is the importance of two things. One, the country I'm in, and two, the distance between me and these people. And if you really want to go for it, three, the racial divide. And to them, that seemed like something that mattered. And to me, I hadn't even thought about it. Like the type of people that were on, for lack of a better term, on our side, that were taking part in this, you know, we really identified with the idea that these borders don't matter, that they're humans, we're all on the same rock, so we're going to help. What does the fact that they're a different race or live in a different country have to do with the fact that they need to overthrow a dictator?
The us versus them, the inside versus the outside.
I just, and some people called into question, you know, after I made those statements, like my patriotism. Well, yeah, but don't you care about America? Well, sure, I would like my country to be safe, secure, have good, you know, good control, you know, everything else. But at the same time, does that keep me from caring about people in other countries? Does that stop me from having compassion? I don't think it should. And the questions that were asked along those lines were all, to me, very offensive. I mean, what do these borders in this context actually matter? They don't at all. These are other people who are currently under a very authoritarian regime, getting mistreated, who need some help. And while I definitely don't think anything I did led to the overthrow of Ben Ali, I think we helped. I think we did a lot to support the people in the streets who were actually risking their lives. And I think it was important.
I think there's something to the outside versus the inside, as I said before. And, you know, in Australia and in Tunisia, both, it was the outside rallying. It was the people on the outside that were able to communicate with the people on the inside to show that support. And it seems to be that's one of the ways that you can really give people the hope that they need when it's a time of despair.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much how the Arab Spring went from our side. It was just continuing down that path. You know, Egypt went really funny when we're watching traffic graphs, because we're watching all of these tools to see, you know, how the internet traffic's working, how much data we're getting out. And then out of nowhere, the graph, the bar chart just falls to the bottom and there's no more coming out. And we realized they had gotten so upset by all of our tactics to get around their blocks and their stopping that they just cut the cables. They were done. They went right to the telecoms and said, turn the internet actually off. And of course, you know, that led to one of the fallbacks. Some of the people in some of the major cities using satellite phones to still communicate with each other, which had been provided by a relatively wealthy Egyptian who had set that up. And that was brilliant of him. But, you know, if that had failed, we actually had another fallback after the satellite phones. If they had found a way to stop that or found the people with the phones, we had a ham radio network set up of people in every major city that were ham radio operators that were set up and ready to go and get the word out. So like we had layers of communication built into this after that happened. And it was a really transformative event for a lot of people involved, because, you know, how many times in your life do you get to take part in something that actually overthrows a government and removes a you know, multi-decade dictator? Like, you know, maybe you weren't on the ground taking the bullets. Maybe you weren't there when, you know, the people rode through the center of the square beating, you know, protesters. But you were still taking part in some way. You were still part of what was going on, and that's a very transformative event for a lot of people. So a lot of the people that took part simply because they were there and they had some skills, but maybe they didn't even care that much. By the end of it, they were different. They really did think, what do we do next? What is the next thing, right? What is politically, how can I keep taking part in this stuff? And I think that led to a lot more political action taken by youth, by people who were involved in this. I've talked to a few people who that event really transformed, and they've run for local city councils. They've run for mayors, and, you know, surprisingly, there are some people who started out with an anon mask sitting in those seats now. There's some in some state houses, as representatives. As it's surprising where they've gone with it, but they started. They got that feel for what it's like to be political in those events.
And coming back from there, I mean, the main theme that seems to be going on in all these events that in the last 5 years or so of this story is when the government crosses the line, when the bully crosses the line, when they do that one thing that's just too far, it's just something that people can't tolerate. You have to step up and do something about it. So coming back kind of our borders here, the next event there is really Occupy for you, right?
I mean, there are much bigger events in terms of anonymous at that point. There's HB Gary Federal, which was hilarious. There's, Ouroboros. There's the Wisconsin protests. There's Operation Sony. There's so many to talk about during all of that. There's even like Operation Bart. But really, on the world stage, you get to Occupy, and what's really interesting about Anonymous's role with Occupy is you can look at how much attention Occupy was getting before accounts like YouAreNonNews said anything, before the media was interviewing people like me and others involved with Anonymous, with hacking, with a lot of anti-government type of protesting. Before all of that, it wasn't really getting talked about. It's not like it was on the front page of the New York Times at that point. And then we noticed it and decided that it was time to maybe back this. Maybe we wanted to support this Occupy idea. And so some accounts like YouAreNonNews started tweeting out about it and started saying, we're doing this, and really started getting loud about their support. And at that point, the news started reaching out to people like me, but also out to the people who were actually organizing Occupy. And we all started talking to the news, doing interviews. This is what's coming. This is the day it's coming. The 17th there, what was just an interesting day. We had no idea what impact it would have. We had no idea how many people would show up. But by the time all that news coverage was done, we knew that the world knew this was going to happen. And one of the more interesting pieces going into it was we knew that there on day one, you had to get a foothold for New York. And a lot of people hadn't really talked too much about were other cities going to protest in those cities or not. And some cities were like holding up the signs protest and then going home, but they weren't setting up camp like Occupy was. And so we're in New York for the first few days of Occupy, and we leave to come back to Boston. And our goal in coming back to Boston was to set up Occupy Boston and to get us running. And the best thing that could have happened. I get back to Boston on a bus. And before I can get up and set up an event page and start reaching out to anyone, someone else has already set up an event page, a time, a meeting place for everyone to start meeting and talking about setting up Occupy Boston. I didn't have to do it. Wasn't on me this time. And I just showed up to the event like, what's up? What are you guys doing? And I noticed a few other people who had been down at Occupy for the last couple of days there. Shook hands, said hi to them, and like, where are we going? And, we got it knocked off. And after Occupy Boston launched and the world kind of noticed, you saw a lot of other cities come up. You saw Cleveland, was a big one that came up, but you saw Oakland. You just saw all over the world, other Occupies started going up. And I think Boston really helped to set the example of this isn't a one city thing. This is, now that this one's up, this second one's up, that means the rest of you got to go too. And it just spread like wildfire, went everywhere at that point.
I'd have to say there were people bringing in donations like crazy, and I shout out to Frank, who is the cook who kept everybody together. And
food, not bombs.
Yeah, exactly, totally.
Love those guys, man. Yeah, it was crazy times watching it all initially get organized. I will admit one thing that I haven't actually admitted on the air or publicly anywhere. But on day one of Occupy Wall Street at Occupy, as it's initially starting to get off the ground, people have finally showed up and they've been pushed off to Zuccotti, which really upset me because there were enough people to overpower those cops and take Wall Street. And we were 5 feet from it. But when the cops said we're going this way and started to walk off, 90% of the protesters just followed the cops. Like that was what they were. And they walked right over to Zuccotti, and I'm standing there like, what are you people doing? Like taking orders. I thought this was Occupy Wall Street. And they just followed him over to Zuccotti and then got fenced in. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. But I get there, and there's a guy walking around, and he's got a megaphone. And there's another guy with him, and I recognize one of them as one of the guys who had been early in on some organizing on this, and he had done some of the work that I had seen talked about in the press. So I walk over and just start talking to him, like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? You know, and they explain it to me. Like one of them recognized me from some of the news I had done, and he recognized me, and he walks over and he says, okay, so what we're going to do, look at the crowd. And I looked out at everyone in the park, and people were kind of organically already sectioning themselves off. You could see like groups of like 5, 10, even 20 kind of talking. And they weren't doing it because they were told to. They were just kind of finding people to talk to, and they were becoming groups, right? And so he looks me right in the eyes, and he means this. He says, okay, so I'm gonna go up there, and he points at kind of the front of the park, and I'm going to get up on top of the concrete there, and I'm going to hold up the megaphone, and I'm going to just call out to everyone and say, all right, you've already gotten yourself into groups, so all of you groups, what I want you to do is talk about why you think we're here, and then in a couple hours, you're going to send someone up to the front, and they're going to tell us all what your group decided was the reason we're all here was. And we're all going to use the standard, democracy signs, and we're all going to put our hands up in this way. And he showed me some of the signs. I'm like, I know how that works. I know how to block. And he says, okay, well then, whichever one we like the most, that's going to be the reason we're here. And I looked at him with this look like, are you stupid? What? That's not how anything works. You literally told everyone why you're coming here. There was a call to arms, a call to action that said, here's what's going on. Here's why we're showing up. Here's what we want to defeat. This has been played in the news, on TV, in the media, on the front page of the New York Times, finally. And now you're just going to kind of randomly let people figure out why we're here and then maybe vote for one of them?
You need a mission statement to throw a protest.
Yeah, It was killing me. So, just through a lot of my social engineering and everything else, I had learned kind of how to, deal with people. And I knew that he had been holding this megaphone for a long time. So I just kind of got next to him and then kind of reached out for it to take it from him, and not really thinking, because he was in such a deep conversation, he just handed it to me. And he was like, oh yeah, here you go. And then I took a couple steps back because he was facing the other way having this conversation. And once I was out of his field of vision, I just walked off and left Occupy that day and took his megaphone and gave it to a friend who lived in town and said, this does not go back to Occupy. He's not allowed to do that. And when I got back, he's searching all over for his damn megaphone. Where is it? Where is it? And I said, I don't know. I handed it back to you. And he said, you did? And I said, I did. And he, at this point, I could see in his eyes, he was high as hell. And so he was like, you must have. Yeah. What did I do with it? And I said, I have no idea, man. You were over there. And then I walked off. I was just, and he didn't end up getting in front of everyone and asking him to do that either. He was too busy trying to find his megaphone at that point. And I still have that megaphone. It's sitting at my house, and I still look at it every now and think about that first day of Occupy.
You met a lot of pretty influential people, right? I mean, there were celebrities, actors, actresses, politicians as well, right? So who were some of the people you met there that impressed you, or that kind of, left a resonating impression with you?
Russell Simmons came by.
Russell Simmons came by and talked. He didn't just stand there. He took the mic.
Noam Chomsky came by.
Noam, and he came to, we got him up at Boston, up here. Down at Zuccotti, I went down for Tom Morello came, played a little. Anti-Flag came and played a little. And, I'd known them from a little before, from some of the days when I used to think about music and maybe doing some of it. Didn't work out for me. But there were some pretty interesting people who showed up at that event. I mean, yeah, Russell was one of the more interesting ones because he really he took the mic and talked to the crowd.
He means it seems like, when he's involved in those events.
Yeah.
So activism, how does it pay?
Activism, well, for me, it doesn't. It costs money in supplies, in time spent not earning money in other ways. Activism has kept me very poor because I don't seem to be the kind of activist who knows where the money is. I just know how to get shit done. I keep being told by all of my I won't call them friends, but acquaintances on the right that we're all paid. If anyone is actually doing that, I'm really easily doxxed. My information's all over the internet. I would love some of this supposed money.
Yeah, W-2 1099 is fine, either one.
Yeah, I don't have any of it. This microphone we're on is used and reclaimed from a destroyed building. Like I didn't even get new microphones. Like this is yeah. It does not pay. In fact, is what I'm saying.
Facts.
Some people have figured out how to make a living at it, but man, that's not me. Not the stuff I've been doing. You don't get paid to go to Occupy.
It does seem like you just kind of follow where people needed help for many years in a row there. There has to be some point or another where you start going after different opportunities that can actually create a life. You talked about a wife and family earlier, right? Wife and kids. So, what's next for you there?
Again, just like everything else, I didn't really choose to do the next thing. I had no say in what happened next. It just kind of happened to me. Yeah, at that point, I'm sitting at home watching a Netflix show, House of Cards, season 1. I'm up to about episode 7 when I get contact from someone claiming to be from the show. This guy, Bo Willimon, who says, he's part of the show.
You don't know that name at that point?
I mean, I remember seeing it at the beginning of the episodes in the credits, but I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, it says you're the creator. Okay, well, it's not you. Nah. I hung up on the guy. I did not believe that it was him. I believed that one of my hacker friends was watching my Netflix and knew that I was watching it and was calling to screw with me and trolling me, saying that he was actually the guy who created the show that I'm currently watching. It took a few more pieces of outreach from him, some email, and whatnot, another phone call before I finally was like, okay, this could be you, actually. What do you want? And I find out that they're looking to work a hacker storyline into the show, and why not have me help them, work on it? Work on some of the scripts, cleaning up anything to make it more hackerish, work on some of the scenes, on what some of the rooms look like, on how the hacker acts, I'm like, I can do that. I know all of that, but you want it to look really real? Like, can we actually put like terminals on the screens and whatnot? He's like, yeah, like I want this to look real. And there we go. I get carted off to Baltimore because, we're shooting a political thing. So we've got to have easy access to DC. And there I am on set with Kevin Spacey and, Mahershala Ali and, all these other people who are just amazing. And
they're one of the first shows to really try to, display and demonstrate the hacking lifestyle, the hacking character as accurately as possible, would you say?
I think they're one of the first that's really that popular to do it. This is definitely right before things like Scorpion and, CSI Cyber, both of which suck. And nothing even close to like hacking happens on those shows. Nothing they do is real. Mm-hmm. They are horrendous. And whoever is consulting for them, I hope never lands another job. Also, don't hate me for saying that if you're listening, but dude, you suck. I make a little money off of that, but man, you learn that the rates in that, unless you're the creator or the lead actor, you're not getting paid that much. Yeah. You're not making a living unless you're, working literally every episode doing lots of work.
Relationships and networking.
But I did, make some good relationships with some interesting people. The person who played the character, Gavin in the show, Jimmy Simpson, I count among my good friends now. He's doing great in Westworld right now. Everyone should watch it. It's
great show
awesome.
As well. Yeah, sure.
I still have some catching up to do. I feel bad about that, being that my friend's in the show, but it led to a point where I can literally say my friend is in that show. Like, here I am, right? Yeah. And it also led to a few years ago getting another interesting phone call from someone saying he's working on a new TV show for USA Networks. And would I be interested in maybe, playing around with the show? And come to find, they'd hired a couple of the actors who had been in House of Cards. And the guy running this show knows the guy who ran House of Cards. And all 3 of those people had said, you should hire Gregg to help you with this. Good. Thanks. Thanks for the referral, guys. Again, if any of you are listening, thanks for the referral. Yeah. But I get to see this pilot episode of this Mr. Robot show like 8 months before it hits air. And I'm told under no circumstances can I talk about it. Can I tell any of my friends? So I watched this pilot just mesmerized. Like, this is going to be my new favorite show. Is this really going on TV? Are they going to allow you to show some of the stuff that you've shown? Like, that thing he just typed at the command line's real. You do that, you're going to mess something up. Like, they're letting you show real hacks. Like, that's Metasploit right there. I mean, sure, a lot of script kiddies use Metasploit and whatnot, but at the same time, you can still play around with that thing. And he was like, yeah, we're trying to do this as real as possible, but we need to get it a little better. And that's when I noticed that, there's a mask involved. There's some kind of underground group involved. And I'm like, I know all of that type of stuff. I can help. We go back and forth a little, and I definitely give them some hints on, some things they might want to change in the pilot and everything. But turns out NBC doesn't want to hire felons. And of course, I am a felon. Mm-hmm. Lucky me. Yeah. Although, Christian, I love you, Mr. Slater there. But they hired him, and he's a felon. So, I'm still kind of upset about that one. I feel slighted. So what we ended up doing is I ended up coming on as a consultant through a third-party company that was listed, not me. And I only did a little. I mean, I did what I could. I answered questions when I could. I gave them little tips. I definitely helped with some of the language understanding. But, their team, Core, Mike, Sam especially, I mean, they're just really good at what they do. I just was able to help with what I could, and it was so much fun getting to help with what I could on that show. Like, I still feel so privileged getting to see that pilot episode so far in advance of all of my friends. Like,
show is like every millennial's favorite show right now.
And then I got to be in season 2, like, episode 1 of season 2. There I am with a cameo, and I'm like, I feel so unworthy of being there, because all the other people in that scene, other than the actress and the actor with lines, all the other people were extras who I'm sure have been spending years of their lives trying to get lines and haven't yet. And there I am, the guy who has no idea what he's doing, trying to, act like I have emotions or something.
Delivering a killer line too.
Oh yeah, totally. Literally, when we were done with 6 hours of trying to get my take, I actually asked Sam Esmail, did I do anything you can actually use? And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. I can totally cut this one. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I asked Core, like, is he being serious or is he messing with me? Because I don't think there was anything usable there. That was 6 hours of useless from me. And he said, no, you were fine. So it ended up in the show. I, got through. But yeah, it has led to that. And now it's led to me working on a few other shows and starting to play around with some ideas of pitching my own shows. And it's been interesting because I've spent a lot of the last decade just working in media, trying to get them to actually understand hacker culture and understand what's going on and portray it correctly, to get, the general public to really understand what's going on here.
Why is that so important to you?
Well, for me, it's important because, you could see even 20 years ago that culture was going to have a lot to do with the future of our world. That those people that grow up with those skill sets were going to start impacting our planet, not just because, you might fear for your bank account from some, Russian hacker who's got a merchant account he stole and now he's stealing your ID. No, because someone might try and hack an election. Someone might try and turn off a power grid. And, I just felt that it was the right time for the general public to start getting a better idea of what this was. And the media wasn't doing that good of a job of it. Again, look at Scorpion and CSI Cyber. And don't, actually. They don't deserve the views. But
don't really.
But just, their portrayal of it is wrong. Outright, 100%. And the media, when they were covering hacks, a lot of the time they couldn't hear from, again, what I'll kind of refer to as our side. The company, corporation, the person, whoever that was getting attacked would get to release a statement of, these bad, horrible people. But the hackers weren't. And I had access to a lot of these hackers. I could figure out why they had done what they had done and whether they wanted the media to print it correctly. And if they did, I could go to that media who were now paying attention to me and say, this is why that happened. And here's what really happened, not the sensational stuff. Amazon being DDoSed, what didn't cost them $500,000? They were offline for 2 seconds. I think it might have cost them $10. And just being able to add more reality in was important to me simply because look at where we are now. Half of the news is about currently Russian hackers. Did they do something? Well, maybe, hopefully, some of the public has a little better understanding of that, and maybe we can still keep working to get them an even better understanding of that.
And then what happens if the U.S. government keeps going after hackers so aggressively, portraying them with the sensationalizing? How do we, protect our country if we're going to go the nationalism route and take the government's argument at this point? How are they going to defend ourselves right now against Russian hackers who seem a lot more organized at this point?
The other countries, you look at Russia, you look at China, I think really got a big head start. One, in Russia, you had a country that wasn't prosecuting hacking and really theft from overseas or anything else at any high level. And we learn that through a lot of the latest revelations in news that things like the Zeus botnet, which was a banking Trojan that was stealing money from lots of people around the globe, they knew who did it and they allowed it to keep going because they had figured out access to the thing and were using it to gather information on some of the targets those bots were on. So they were okay with this large amount of cybercrime because it was helping them gather intelligence. And what that led to was a country where there were a lot of really good hackers who didn't fear prosecution, so they just kept going and getting better and building tools and starting to sell those tools to other hackers. And internally in the government, in a government like that, especially a more authoritarian one, they don't just come to you and, offer you, hey, you want a job with the NSA? No, they come to you and say, you're working for the government now, and you don't get to say no. So they were cultivating these environments of really good hackers. And in China, they were just training them up from a young age to go right into a very militarized kind of hacking environment, while we were not for a long time.
Very different approach.
One was that we didn't have any really youth-based programs that would identify people that the government might be able to start working with early. I don't know that I like those in the first place, but we didn't. And two, the military really didn't have strong recruiting and then training towards what they're calling, their cyber army at this point, their cyber command. They just didn't. They had some people in there. They had different divisions working on this stuff, but there wasn't this pipeline that the world knew existed, and there weren't these programs like, the Pentagon ran a bug hunt last year. They weren't doing that type of stuff a decade ago, and back by then, these other countries already were. So there was some catching up to do here. And I think, one of the good things about the general public understanding it is that in the end, we do actually need to protect some of this stuff. Who wants our infrastructure being so wide open? You might be against the size of our government. You might be so libertarian that you don't want really any regulations in place. And you don't want our military ever leaving our borders unless it's just protecting our territorial waters and they never fly outside of that. You might want all of that, but you still want our borders, right? You still want us to be a secure nation. You still want the power to stay on in the city you live when, the next, big war happens. You don't want, so we need someone protecting that stuff with these skills. And you look at West Point now, it actually has, West Point has a cyber training course. They are bringing people in and training them up. And so I think a lot of the teaching and the explaining properly to the general public is leading towards them being more accepting of our government, building out that infrastructure and that understanding and hiring those people. It also will hopefully help them build out cultures where these people want to work. At this point, most of the hackers I know and most of the really skilled cybersecurity people I know don't want to work for the government. They might be okay working for a contractor that is contracted to them, but actually working for the government means a level of restrictions that they're just not willing to work under because the type of person they are, the very anarchistic kind of nature of most of them they're not going to wear a suit and go into the NSA's offices.
Maybe the government's behavior over the last,
Yeah, and their over prosecution of all of their friends also scares them. I mean, heck, just the fact that you have to be able to pass a pot test. Are you smoking marijuana? You can't work at these places. Well, I know very few hackers that pass that test. Just a thing, Yeah. They've got to figure out ways to build culture that these people want to work for. Not that I want all of my hacker friends going to work for the government. I just also think there has to be a balance. And right now, it's not that strong of a balance in this country.
Let me ask you just one more question about a topic I think a lot of people understand a little bit about, but maybe just a more fundamental understanding of it might help a lot, which is encryption. So where does encryption come into play in a lot of the topics you talked about regarding national security, information security, and what people need to be studying moving forward to generations?
I mean, encryption's importance is the fact that done properly, it's your only source of privacy that's left. We know now from the Snowden revelations, we know now from other leaks that there's nothing stopping them from collecting the data, whether they're legally allowed to or not. They're going to keep getting that data. And I mean, one of the things we really want to do here is throughout this show as we go forward is talk about that. You know, what programs should you be using? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you, as a journalist, keep from being spied upon by the government who wants to find your sources? You know, there's tools, methodologies that can be used for that. And we're going to talk about a lot of that on this show. We're going to talk about ways to maintain your privacy. We're going to talk about the importance of encryption, which just really goes down to how private do you want to be? How much privacy do you want to have? How much do you think the government deserves to know about your life? How much do you think Google deserves to know about your life and Facebook? Encryption serves a really large role in our future, and it needs to be protected. It needs to be built out. It needs to be supported, and it needs to be used. So, you know, I think that really kind of speaks to, if you listened to this whole thing, a lot of where I come from. It speaks to a lot of what I want to talk about, and it speaks to how I got here. And it gives you a good idea of where we're going forward. You know, there's going to be a lot of talks about activism. There's going to be a lot of politics, a lot of current events, a lot of how-tos on the latest, greatest tools you might want to do to be able to do activism successfully, to be able to protect your privacy, to be able to support the latest causes, you know, and which causes are legit and which ones are just scams. You know, where do you need to throw your support? It's going to be all of that in one. You know, how much can we get out in a week? We'll see. But that's kind of the goal here. And, you know, what I'd like to do now is maybe see if Dave or Matt here have any questions based on all that stuff they just heard. Because that was, what, 2.5 hours? 2 maybe after editing? How about it, Dave?
What mode of encryption do you prefer?
It depends on exactly what you're doing. I mean, you know, email, all that fun stuff, you know, use GPG. I think, you know, there are slightly more hackerish ways to do it, but if you're going to try and do it, I'd say the easiest way for, you know, the general public to do it would be loading up Thunderbird as your mail client and loading up the plugin for it, which is called Enigmail, Enigmail. And Enigmail really integrates encrypted email very clearly, makes it very simple to use, makes key management pretty simple. If you're talking about real-time communications, I mean, at this point, the only thing I trust for real-time communications, if I want them encrypted, is Signal by Open Whisper Systems. It does voice, text, and video now, all in, you know, very secure manner. It's all been peer-reviewed. The source has been looked at. It's been rolled out. The Signal protocol has been rolled out into Facebook Messenger, into WhatsApp, so that their systems are a little more secure if you turn on encryption in them. But those are definitely the two sets of tools I would be using there. If I'm trying to encrypt my hard drives, I'm going to be probably leaning on VeraCrypt at this point, a fork of TrueCrypt that's done a lot of work. Maybe, you know, on a Windows or a Mac computer, you know, down on Linux, I'm going to be looking at DMCrypt and Lux. But, you know, there's a lot of choices to be had here, and I think there's a much deeper dive to be had on the exact tools, but that's kind of, you know, the basics for right now.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Pretty informative.
Very informative.
Yeah. I mean, I think we covered a lot in that. I think people will get a good feel for, you know, I guess who I am and why I'm here at this point. Yeah. You know, I have a lot of questions as to why I'm doing this, and I think I hope we answered some of that during this. I hope it came across as some good stories there.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
You said that Anonymous has gone through phases. What do you think the next phase in the
That's the hardest question to answer because, you know, you look at Anonymous and every time it's done something, it's changed. It's been so many things that that's kind of its power, that since anyone can use the brand and the name, anyone does. So at any time it could be, hell, right now it could be pro-Trump and it could be anti-Trump at the same time. So taking a wild guess at that is near impossible, and it would just be a wild guess. I mean, I honestly think that a lot of the people that came up through the ranks over the last few years, you know, playing around with Anonymous as something they did, are ending up more politically active and more, you know, active in nonprofits and other types of activism as they grow older and less involved with Anonymous. But if that's what Anonymous did for them, then that's great because it got more people onto the side of taking action. And I think that's really what it does kind of going forward is it hopefully gets a lot more youth heading in the direction of taking action. What that action looks like really depends on who decides to use the name today.
last question? As a security and information technology consultant / expert, what would you say to President Trump's claims that Obama, quote, tapped his wires or whatever? Any legitimacy, do you think, to that, or do you off his trails for?
I think
Version
the
tactics.
idea that he's trying to throw the public off his trail gives him too much credit for intelligence. I don't think he can think that far ahead. I mean, people like to claim he's a great businessman, but a great businessman doesn't continually, year over year, go bankrupt. One, understandable, maybe when you're young, but no. What's he on? 7, 8? I don't know. He's definitely on more than one. So I don't know that he's that good of a businessman, and thus I don't know if he's that good of a tactician to be doing that. I think he just said it because he heard someone else say it, and you know he seems to take rumor and then state it as fact like every few hours.
It's convenient. Right?
That's his thing. As for what actually happened there, I mean, now we kind of have a better picture of it. What we're being told actually happened was Trump Tower, there was some actual surveillance collection going on, but it wasn't of him. It was of other people in the building, specifically people who were being told are, well, basically the Russian mob. And that in those conversations and in that collection, you ended up with some of the names of people that had something to do with Trump's campaign, his transition team, and his current, you know, operating staff. And so that's where their names came in. It wasn't a direct attempt to get their names or to get information on them. It was indirect. They just happened to appear in other intelligence that was gathered for seemingly legitimate reasons. Yeah, I mean, there you go. We actually ended it on current events. Look at that. So we're gonna sign off here. It's been a little longer than we expected. Honestly, we expected to go about an hour. I think we're at 2.5 now, somewhere around there. Yeah. So after editing, we'll probably be somewhere down at 2. You know, unless the engineer's really rude and we're down at like 1 again. But he's laughing at me. Anyways, there we go. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for having me.